The supercomputers that have shown, that have these climate models on them, the only place that global warming has actually occurred yet is in computer modeling. The computer models, as I said, they can't reproduce clouds. They can't even reproduce past weather. So when all of the variables that go into the formulas to project future weather are used by the scientists who run the computers to recreate past weather, when they use all of the formulas that they're using to tell us it's going to be doom and gloom in the future, they cannot even accurately tell us what went on in the past. I think you ought to be able to match up your software to the past temperature record before you start to say that it's capable of projecting the future temperature record. They can't do that. Polar bears. How many people, everybody here has heard that the polar bear is in danger? Oh, its ice is melting, the Arctic is... First of all, a couple of things about polar ice. Arctic ice, if we're talking about the big melt last summer, is a tiny fraction of the world's ice stores or ice archive. There are two big places where 95% of all the Earth's ice is, Greenland and Antarctica. Okay, so you said, but Antarctica, I heard just a couple weeks ago, big chunk of ice, 120 square miles, broke off, floated away. That's proof of global warming. I talked to a scientist at the University of Arizona who said 120 square miles of ice in Antarctica, which is a continent bigger than Europe, and covered by between 2.5 and 5 miles of ice. 120 square miles of this little ice shelf breaking off is the equivalent of an icicle breaking off your house in springtime. Now, unless you're prepared to change public policy radically, every time an icicle falls off of your house, you needn't worry about this Antarctic ice shelf. Because at the other end of Antarctica, that's on the west end of Antarctica, on the east end, the ice is thickening. Nobody's quite sure why. It's breaking off on one part and melting on the, or building up on the other and melting on one. But it would indicate to me, if it can build up on one side, that it might not be global warming that's causing it to melt and break off on the other side. The central point of this is that I think the science is uncertain still. I don't think we can say with certainty. I don't care that the UN has 1,200 or 2,500 or 10,000 scientists who are prepared to sign on to the global warming theory. Scientific truth has never been determined by show of hands. If it was, medieval scientists would have been right that you could turn lead into gold if you found the Philosopher's Stone. They would have been right that the sun orbited the Earth. There have been all sorts of scientific theories that have been wrong, which if you ask the majority of scientists, they would have voted for. So when you hear about the polar bear and the Antarctic and the Arctic ice melting, remember first of all that Arctic ice is very thin. It's only a few meters thick. In Greenland and in Antarctica, it's several kilometers thick. We have only had reliable records of Arctic ice coverage by satellite since 1979. So when somebody says, this is record melting, yeah, it's record since 1979. I got belly rolls older than 1979. We've only had aerial photos of the Arctic ice coverage since 1972, and there are several exploration records from the early 1900s, the 1800s, even back into the 1700s, where there were open passages in the Arctic. Clearly it's happened before. So why does everyone just naturally assume that the melt last summer was something unusual, something that only we could have caused? Which brings me back to the polar bear. The polar bear is what's called charismatic megafauna. It's a cuddly big animal. It's a photogenic big animal. People look at them and they say, oh, that's so nice. They say that until they're out near Churchill, Manitoba on the open plains by themselves and one of them is chasing their sorry little butts. Polar bears are very vicious. They are one of the most likely predators, carnivores, to attack humans. We do not threaten them, we do not intimidate them. They will chase us. They might look cute, but don't try taking one home. In 1940 and the 1950s, there were somewhere around 4,000 or 5,000 polar bears in the world. There are currently somewhere between 22,000 and 25,000. This is significant because polar bears are, we're told, endangered because their ice flows are disappearing and they have to swim too far between ice flows and land in order to survive. 40s and 50s were especially cold. The ice coverage in the Arctic that we can tell, because we don't have whole records from that era, the ice coverage there was much greater than it is now. So why are there more polar bears now than there were then? There's more hunters now, more people. 20,000 Americans a year fly up to the Northern Territories to hunt polar bear. It used to be only a few hundred in the 40s and 50s. They're hunted more extensively. Turns out that when the ice opens up a little bit more than it did in the 40s and 50s, the seals that the polar bears eat can come to the surface more rapidly. They breed more rapidly. They find it easier to get onto land and set up large colonies that the bears can then hunt. I don't say that if you melted all the ice in the Arctic, there'd be 1 million bears. Clearly, bears need some ice. But the bears are healthier than they've been since we started keeping records about 50 years ago, partly because there's less ice, and there are more seals that can get to the surface for them to eat. But you get this mass hysteria, and I think it affects sometimes even the scientists who are involved.